I'm going to introduce you from my heart. So everyone's being introduced to you through Louise lens right now, okay? Yehuda Tagar, who I met in about 2002 in Cape Town, who had freshly arrived there from Australia, founded and created and developed this modality of psychophonetics, counselling and psychotherapy. It has evolved over the years, become more distilled, more clear in its processes. I've witnessed it over the past 20 years, changing and developing to what it is today. And then Mick, I have not known Mick as long as Yehuda. Mick originates in Australia as well. And it was in Australia years ago that you met Yehuda's work and actually experienced psychophonetics counseling. You now live in England. You are a father, a husband, a singer and musician. And also you have the Spiritual Scientist podcast where you open talking spaces for delving deep into the mysteries of the human consciousness and universe. And you're also a counselor and coach and specializing in bereavement counseling.
Mick also have the program of teaching staying connected, creating communication between people who are still here and the loved ones who crossed over, and he's doing this professionally.
Okay, I'm going to hand over. All right.
At the moment, I want to introduce Louise Waterfall.
Oh.
Louise is one of the most experienced psychophonetics practitioner, graduates from 2000 and something, starting in she's South African. We met in Cape Town. She completed the training in England. She's there ever since. She's in Devon. And she brought me to England in the first place in 2006. And then she decided to try it again. And so she's bringing me now to England again. And Louise is our Psychophonetics UK, School of Empathy, UK coordinator. We are creating the new training in the UK.
Thank you. Okay, I'm handing over to you two now. Okay, I'll try and keep a tabs on the time. Happy? Ready?
Okay, great. Should I start speaking then?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction, Louise. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and to be invited to actually ask some questions so that we can explore the creation of psychophonetics and a little bit about what it is and how it was born and the person, the individual that comes from, because every modality that's created on Earth really comes from a human being. A human being here in a physical body has to make something happen. And that's definitely the case here with Yehuda and psychophonetics and methodical empathy. So welcome everyone. Nice to have you here. There's some familiar faces to me here, which is really nice. And Yehuda and I have had a few conversations and online and in person as well here in Devon. So it's nice to be here sharing the space again. So I think the best place to start really, Yehuda, is just to ask you about how did psychophonetics come to birth, and what was it, what were the formative experiences for you, maybe personally, that led to it, and how did it arrive in the world?
Well, I don't know how far back to go, but I was brought up in a kibbutz in Israel, where people live very tightly together. There's about 500 people for dinner in my community. And we are very close to each other in one way. But as I was moving into my adolescence, I realized that we don't really communicate. I became aware more and more of everything that we don't communicate. And I was a talker and a communicator and a party organizer and a social creature, but then I realized something huge is not communicated here. And then I sort of broke into poetry, and I realized what I cannot say in prose, I can try and say in poetry. So poetry became a language, but I realized that I need to understand people's own poetry. So ever since, and this is like my adolescence, I'm searching for the language, for that which cannot be spoken in prose, for that which cannot be born out of reflection, because reflection is born out of it. And so I think I was born that way, searching for that which is not spoken, advocating that which is not spoken. And I realized that I'm not the only one, that this is born in the 50s, and humanity came to a crunch of aloneness in the 50s. That's the birth of existentialism. When we realized with all our intellectualization and with all our individuation, we become lonely. And that's the birth of existentialism, that we cannot communicate anymore through the collective belief systems and traditions. And nothing wrong with the traditions and belief system. It's just that something else lives in us, that search for communication. I think ever since I am in a search for a language that can express what we don't yet have a language for. That's what he's born for. And very early on in my life, I had very important friends on the other side. My mother died when I was 11. My father died in my arms when I was 19. And they remained very close to me ever since. Again, intellectual reflection is not the language for communication with people on the other side. And so I was called upon into a broader community of quietness. And I became aware of the inner reality of quietness. And so I became a poet. Basically, that's how I breathed. I went through many other professions, but education for me became, I'm an educator. I was a youth educator, became adult educator for many years. And for me, education is, again, the birth of that which is not born yet. So I'm aware that there is so much in us, not born yet. I became a midwife of that which is not born. I'm not original in that. Socrates also called himself a midwife. And I think what I call counseling or psychotherapy or personal development is really a form of midwifery of what is not born in us yet. So that's my origin of that. And then I discovered various manifestations of the threshold between what we know and what we don't know, and what we experience and what we don't experience. It didn't take much to realize that most of the human soul is not here. Well, it's here, but not conscious. And yet we are here to make it conscious. And so around age 17, I discovered Steiner, and he was speaking about this world that is not known to us, this world that the great teachers are speaking about. But he had a promise that in everyone there is a potential to discover direct and personal experiential connection to the higher and the deeper dimensions of reality. Well, that appeared to my adventurous spirit very much. And then I am a student, not just of Steiner, but of this threshold initiation teaching, that what we know, for me, is indication of what we can still know. And I was interested in what I know and respecting of it, but I'm always much more interested in what I don't know. And so I started where this teaching came 100 years ago, when the spiritual dimension was still considered something transpersonal to the person. But then I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and I think something happened to us in the last 100 years. And that which was the spiritual dimension, in a way external to the human psyche, became internal. The spiritual world became intimate. And Rudolf Steiner was one of the prophets of that. The spiritual world become you and me. And so I realized that we can discover the spirit in a very direct way, through discovering the spirit in each other. So I became passionate about the spiritual dimension in each other and in myself, and that there is a connection, organic connection, between me waking up to myself and you waking up to yourself, and we waking up each other, and yet not disappearing into each other. So I think the spiritual world is here and every human being represented. And so I took all this spiritual teaching, of which I'm a student for, I don't know, 6 years, into human relationship. I'm not the first one doing it, of course, and I can name some of my other sources. It's not just Steiner. Those in the 20th century who discovered that the other human being is a representative of a world of soul and spirit. And on the way to other dimensions of soul and spirit, I have to go through you. And in doing so, I discover more of me by meeting you. So I think that is my adventure. And I'm still, after all these years, looking excitedly to meet the new client person that I never met before, because for me, it's as exciting as going to Bulgaria, which I did last summer for the first time, or going to Latin America, or going to Malaysia. Another person is another country. And I never stop being excited about it. And what is exciting is to move from seeing the reality from my point of view to seeing reality from your point of view, which is a huge leap of consciousness. So I think that's the origin. Psychophonetics is the language for the inner life. And it is the first practical application of Rudolf Steiner's Psychosophy, which was the vision that this will develop in the future, not in his lifetime. He knew it will not develop in his lifetime because conditions did not exist. So when I discovered it in the early 80s, I was ready for it. And so I let it grow on me and grow through me, and it became a profession. But the birth of it is in drama. That's a short version.
So when you said just toward the end there about this, the excitement, if you like, of, you know, understanding the world or understanding something from another's point of view, is that where the theatre aspect comes in? Because I think you mentioned before that, you know, what is it that the actor is doing? The actor is actually entering into the skin, as it were, of the character or of this other person. And what you mentioned there about this, you know, the inner reality, that discovering the spirit, the spiritual nature of ourselves, and the soul of the other person, and the soul of ourselves through the other person. Is that where the connection with theatre and acting comes in?
Yes, to all the above, but in different order. Drama or theatre, for me, is the actual origin of human communication in a modern sense. And what we call empathy today, which is a word that didn't really exist in the dictionary before 1951. It's not an ancient Greek word. Somebody invented it. Carl Rogers invented it in its present connotation. This really started a long time ago. Now, conditions for what we call empathy today, and what we call empathy today is just the beginning of a new culture. Conditions for that did not exist for normal people until the middle of the 20th century. And even now it is just a baby. But the beginning of it was planted a long time ago. In the late 19th century, German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a breakthrough interpretation of the history of culture, named The Birth of a Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music. And he was a student, he was a philologist, he was a student of Greek culture, and he came up with this amazing idea that for him, the height of Western culture was tragedy, namely Ischylos, which is like 500 BC. He thought that the philosophers that came later just diluted it. He was not impressed by Socrates. He liked the drama, the tragedy. And for him, the Dionysian and Apollonian streams came together in a caduceus sort of way to produce the real existential awakening of the human being that is leading to the higher human being, das Übermensch. He said, God is dead, now we have the Übermensch. Now, when Nietzsche discovered something about the origin of theater, drama. Well, mainly tragedy. Comedy came to balance it. But I discovered that empathy is born out of tragedy. And this is my research. Because I'm a bit of a historian of culture myself, and I spent many years studying theater, starting in England and continuing till today. When two people, for the first time, were put on the stage, representing other two people in a dialogue, trying to convince a third person sitting in the auditorium that there's something real in this play. Because everybody knew that they're not the characters. You know, the first play ever put was a play called Persians, when in Athens, after the victory over the Persian Empire, Ischylos, who was fighting in the Battle of Salamis, came back and established the Dionysian theater and put two people on the stage for the first time, representing two Persian soldiers, trying to convince a Greek audience from Athens that they are actually real. Everybody knows it's just a game. And they represent human beings. Human beings represent human beings to human beings. That's the birth of tragedy, and that's the birth of empathy. So this is where the seed was planted for the future in which one day we will be able to understand human beings from the inside. And I have no doubt that we are working towards this culture now. There will be a culture of empathy if we work diligently at creating it. It will not fall from the trees. It was born in theater. It will result in a completely new culture. And that's my dream. And there was a prophecy that it will manifest among the Slavonic people. So I'm speaking to you from, from the heart of Slavonia. This is Slovakia, yeah? Between Czechia and Hungary and Poland and Ukraine. We are bordering on Ukraine. And the Slavonic nations are still futuristic. They're cultures of the heart. And this new culture of empathy will grow here. While in the West, we develop the individuation and the intellect and the reflection and the independence of thinking. We're still doing it. The future cannot be more egotism and more egocentricity. We will not have a future unless we develop a culture of empathy. And so we are working towards it. But it wasn't as conscious as it is not ever before, because the need for it was not as conscious. So I studied psychology, but that's not what I found empathy. I discovered empathy in theater when I had to become somebody else in a convincing way, in a play. We call it a play. Everybody knows it's not serious. I'm doing Macbeth on the stage. Everybody knows I'm not this Scottish king from 12th century. I mean, what are we doing there? Everybody's lying. I'm pretending to be a Macbeth. They're pretending that I am Macbeth. And we are pretending that we're in Scotland in forests, meeting the three witches, but we were not. Oh, and my colleague was pretending she's going mad as Lady Macbeth. And we both pretend we just killed the king. Now, all this is not real, so we call it a play. Now, what's happening in the process is serious. Because I have to take this same person that I am, this same body, this same biography, this same emotionality, this same psyche, connotations, memory, personality, and shape out of all of that something which will represent someone totally different to me, convincingly. What does it mean convincingly? That for a moment, I can be that person authentically. I cannot do it if I'm not in deeper connection authentically with myself. So this process of going deeper into myself and using what everybody takes for granted, my personality, my physicality, using this as the raw material for shaping completely different human being, which I have to understand from their own point of view. And I stand on the stage and I'm not telling you a story. And I'm not theorizing. And I'm not telling you a legend. I am speaking as if I am that person. That's radical. And what I do in my counseling work is the same as what I did as an actor. I become somebody else. And to do that, I have to use the same Yehuda. I've got another person to use. I have to use myself as the raw material to become you. I never become you, but to come close enough for you to feel at least that you're not alone. It's a building stone of a new community. What are we achieving in the act of empathy? For a moment, I'm not solving your problems. I'm not crossing your thresholds. I cannot face your challenges for you. What can I do for you? I can become your friend for a moment. I can become your companion. I can become for a moment a community of two. And if it's in a group, a community of more. And the same life circumstances, and the same challenges, and the same thresholds and the same crosses. You are not as alone carrying them. I think that is a magnetism of it. But something else happens. In the journey to use me as an instrument of knowing you from inside, something happened that didn't happen before. And that's a miracle of theater, and that's a miracle of empathy. Because I become more me, and you become more you, and we become more us. And that's a touch of future community. So I never left theater. I spent 10 years in experimental theater in London and in Sydney and in Adelaide. And then I discovered that it's too important to leave it just for artists. The drama and the serious business. It's a cutting edge of a new culture. And that I still find exciting 35 years ago, further. It's still an adventure because even if I meet you, Mick, for an empathic process, I have to forget that I know you. What is important is what I don't know about you. And that is applied for all my personal relationship. The deeper I go with people, the more I discovered that everything I know is just introduction to what I don't know yet, because they're changing too. So we're the privileged ones. We're doing it for a living. We're doing it full time. We live on that threshold between me and you. And I didn't make it up. I achieved something in methodical empathy because I stood on the shoulders of giants. I'd like at some point to mention some of them. I just mentioned theater. This is Iskalos from Athens, but there have been quite a number of them since then, even recently in the 20th century. And I am a student. I'm a humble student of these incredible teachers of humanity. And I'd like to acknowledge them, adding some brick to this building of future culture.
Well, thank you for that, Yehuda. I mean, when you say, it sounds quite exciting to think of a culture of empathy, where, I mean, what does that look like? Is that we're all each other's counselors all the time and we're just sitting around talking about our issues in life? Or what does that mean? What does that look like, a culture of empathy?
I will describe it for you in a very concrete way. Now we have to be counselors to do it. But if you think of Pythagoras, 700 BC, he developed mathematics as we know it today. Well, you have to be an initiate to do basic mathematics. Now you expect it from children to class 1 or 2. It became normal to think in categories of Aristotle invented and to engage logic, which Socrates engaged, and to do basic arithmetics that was really not something people did. So it was pioneering for a long time until it became normal. Now we're going further. Not everybody masters calculus, but everybody can do basic arithmetics and read and write. 200 years ago in Europe, only 5% of the population could read and write. Now you have to be something special with you not to be able to read and write by age 7 or 10. So with empathy, I'll tell you what is the future. It's not so abstract. When we reach a culture of empathy, then every child is my child. Imagine that. Every child across the globe, I experience it as my child. And every woman in humanity is my sister. And every man is my brother. And every village is my village. And every country is my country. That's the culture of empathy. And I shall not rest until it become normal. I'm not there. I'm working on it. The time for great teachers is over, I think. Those can teach empathy who are still struggling with it, and I do. And because I do, I'm in ongoing research of crossing this abyss that separates me from you. And we will have this culture. And this is the future of humanity. And if not, humanity has no future. And this is the future of our relationship to nature. And if that will not happen, we'll have no nature. Because it's not just us around, it's the kingdoms of nature. These animals and the plants and the whole planet. And even that is just a small range of the beings that exist, that enable us to live, invisible beings, and we will develop empathy with them too. And we will develop empathy for which you're working and dedicating your life. People die and suddenly they leave the planet or something. Suddenly they become non-people just because they lost the body. This, in my view, is ridiculous. I lost my mother and father early on enough to know that I was never spiritually orphaned. They never left me. And so we need to break through this lie that people die. People don't die. Bodies die. What about empathy with those who just lost the body, but they're still very connected to us? So cultural empathy include the people who cross the threshold and people who are coming to life and the kingdoms of nature and the angelic realm that keep us going and the elemental world that sustain us. That's a culture of empathy. Empathy with the spiritual world is a part of it because we are spirits and the spiritual world is here. So can you see, Mick, both you and I studied anthroposophy for many years. Anthroposophy in action is empathy.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it because, you know, if you do go with that loose definition of empathy, that, you know, a feeling into, I know that's not the whole picture, but feeling into the other person or the situation or whatever it is, that coming into contact with a spiritual being, there is a feeling into, I mean, like in the spiritual world, according to Steiner, everything is feeling into everything else, every other being. There's not this separation that we have here on Earth. So it's, in a way, it's an earthly reflection of that developing empathy. Would you say? I mean, is that fair to say?
It is. And I want to acknowledge the pioneers of that. Because look, we have very intimate relationship with the physical world. It has its own nature. I'm here, you're there, the mountain is here, and the trees are there. But actually, to perceive the physical world, to even sense it, is quite intimate. And if I lose my sight, I lose a big chunk of my intimacy with the world. And if I lose my hearing, I lose some of my intimacy with the world. And my hands are not just instrument to make things, it's also instrument to touch things. So our sense relationship to the physical world is a kind of empathy. And we trust what we see and we act on this. But this is about a quarter of the human existence. What about the rest of it? So I can speak more about methodical empathy a bit later, but awakening to you and the spirit has a prerequisite. I can only do so if I'm awakening to myself as the spirit. Awakening to you as a life system, I can only do if I wake up to my own life system. And then I can also wake up to the earth as a life system. Otherwise, I'm blind. Awakening to you as a being of feelings and emotion, other than me projecting mine on you, require me becoming not just being emotional and feeling being, which every baby is. I have to be conscious of my emotions and feelings to transform them into an instrument of seeing yours. And the human eye can only be understood by a human eye. And that is a spirit. But it's not the only spirit. On the level of soul and spirit, there's those who have bodies. And as you know, there's those who don't have bodies, but are still stolen spirits. They communicate differently, but they communicate. And without them, God knows if we could be here. That's without even mentioning the souls and spirit of the invisible world that sustain the life system. And so the spiritual world was always here. Where else would it be? But we are not fully here. So as we wake up more and more to the complexity and the depth and the height of the anthropos, what we call here the Chelavyak, Smension, the human being, Adam, we wake up to the whole of creation. And in order to be more intimate and more empathetic, if you wish, to the beings around us, the bridge is always inside. Now, I have to mention the definition. You said feeling into. Now, that is actually a touch of the history of empathy in Europe. Because before the word empathy was used by Carl Rogers to describe the central pillar of what he called counseling, because he actually invented the word empathy in its present connotation. Somebody coined it playfully in 1909, but it was never printed, never used. It's Carl Rogers who gave it his connotation, and then it was in the dictionaries within a year. The one who invented the term empathy, his name is Steiner, and he was the first professor of psychology in the world. Interesting. He was also the founder of structuralism. And he was studying with early psychologists in Germany, and he was appointed chair of psychology in Cornell University in New York, and he tried to translate to English a German term, because there was already circling a German term called Einfühlung. And Einfühlung means feeling into. And that was invented also in 1873 by the aesthetic philosopher Vischer, who discovered that what we do with art is conscious, but it's not intellectual. So he said, hang on, I'm conscious and I'm not intellectual. What am I? And he explored what he and others are doing. He was a critic of art and a philosopher of aesthetic. And he said, here's what we do. We don't yet have a word for it. We are feeling into a work of art. To understand a painting, a piece of music, any form of art, we cannot just reflect on it intellectually. That's not art appreciation. We have to enter it, feeling into it. And so he invented a word, Einfühlung, which is the combination of ein, which is in, and Fühlung, which is feeling. He just made it up. And people liked it. But it was still in philosophical circles. And somebody in Germany started to use it for psychology. Early psychologist Lips, he created a term called Einfühlung Vermögen, which means to be inside feeling in. Complicated, yeah? They were struggling. Teacher studied with Wundt in Leipzig, and he liked it. And he tried to translate it to English in America, but he didn't manage to train his fellow American to speak Einfühlen Vermögen with 3 umlauts. They cannot do that. So he invented a new word. He said, well, I suppose it's not sympathy, it's not antipathy. Let's call it empathy. I found his original article for internal circulation. He just made it up in 1909, but it was not printed anywhere, really. And when Carl Rogers was looking for a name for what he discovered that he's doing, he found it somewhere and said, you know what, that's empathy. And he didn't say, I just invented a word. He said, that's empathy. And everyone thought, oh, empathy. Oh, we are supposed to know about it. It's obviously an ancient Greek word. But the Greek, no, it's not an ancient Greek word. They never use the word empathy in Greek, because in Greek, the word empagie means hatred. So they don't use that. Don't try to be empathetic in Athens. It will not be a compound word. So it is a made-up word. And very quickly it took off, because suddenly we all needed it. Because the instinctive way to understand each other started to fade away. The group way, the tribal way, the religious way, the ethnic way, the racist way started to fade away. That was not bringing people together anymore. As we can see, it started to bring people apart more and more in the 20th century. Becoming identified by the group is a retrogressive step. Even today, you know, we got a regression into it from time to time politically, because we are still there, but it's a struggle of the future. And we cannot use collective identity as definition of progress anymore. It has to be individual. But if we just do individuality, which we do, that's what we do in the West, developing individuality, alone, the development of individuality become egotism. And that's not the future. It cannot be the future. We'll never stop needing a community, intimacy, relationship, family, friends, belonging, meaningful community. We'll never stop needing that. It's our nature. But we cannot do it the old way anymore. So empathy became the word for this kind of social cohesion, which is based on the individual. And that's not the East, and that's not the West. That's the center. That's why I'm Central Europe talking to you, because the idea of the I as an entity, das Ich, this came from Central Europe. And the idea of me and you also came from Central Europe. And so I want to mention the philosopher of I is Gottlieb Fichte. And Steiner did his PhD on Gottlieb Fichte, one of the founders of German idealism, who said, I am an origin. I am not a product of biology and biography. I am me. And he was so powerful about it. It became a reality for Central European philosophy, which was idealism. And then later on came the early psychologist Franz Brentano, who also established that to be conscious means an intention between me and the world, but me has to exist to have an intention. And so this was moving away from biology as a basis of psychology, from biography as the only foundation of psychology, to say, just a moment, das Ich exists. And then came Martin Buber, a German Jewish philosopher, and established a philosophy of relationship to say, I can only be my higher being in relationship to another person. And he said, in the real meeting between two people, a new entity is being born. He called it Ich Du, which is a step away from Ich Es. There's me, es is it. There's I and it, and then there's I and you. And a completely new consciousness comes through this. So Martin Buber established this, one of the early existentialists, that they also from Central Europe. And so this is the philosophy of the center. And Steiner built on that, but he opened it up to show that this I, which his predecessors established as an entity, as an origin rather than a product, this I can open up to other dimensions of I, these other I's in existence. And to start with another I, human being. And so it's not either being social or being psychological, being social or being spiritual. It all happens at the same time because we are spirits. And so empathy is waking up to all of that. And Steiner called it initiation.
So could I ask you about you mentioned there that Central Europe, and just I'm sure everybody here gets this anyway, but when Yehuda says eye, he's not talking about, an eyeball, a giant eyeball that's looking at another eyeball, of course, but the individuality, the individuality that we are as a spiritual being. Where was I headed there? Oh yeah, you mentioned about this concept of the I, or we could say the reality of the I being born or first being realized or first being noticed or made conscious in Central Europe. I'm interested to ask you about the different places you've lived, because you've worked and lived in many different countries. And what is it about those places, or is there something about those places that has informed what psychophonetics and methodical empathy has become? Or is it just something that could have happened anywhere and been anywhere? Or is, does it, I'm kind of wanting to know about Australia too. Did Australia and the nature of that country play a role? Did, you lived in England as well, I know that, and South Africa. And, they're very different places. I've lived in Germany, I grew up in Australia, and now I live in the UK. And, we can't pronounce your name properly for a start, but I'm interested to know how have these different places played into this work?
Well, it starts from me. I am a Slavonic descent. My father from Bulgaria, my mother from Ukraine, my grandmother from Russia. So I was, the whole foundation of Israel is Slavonic, basically, Slavonic and Austrian and German. These refugees who came from Europe before the war and after the war. So I was born into that. My parents were running an orphanage for Jewish children, refugees from Europe. And Israel became a shelter for these people who were homeless for 2,000 years, and nobody adopted them. And so my grandfather brought the first group of Jewish people from Sophia to Israel. And so I'm a third generation of people who say we are not waiting for God to create the Messiah for us. We are doing it ourselves. And so I was born into that. And then people came from 120 countries to Israel. And I'm talking about the 50s. And I was brought with people from everywhere. You name it. Arabia, Africa, Asia, Europe, America, Australia. So I was born into Babylon. So, okay, they're all Jewish. Nobody knows what it means really, because they're not religion. My parents were not religious. My grandparents were half not religion. So it wasn't religion that brought us together. We came like refugees, really. Nobody else wanted us. We came back home, and we are still fighting for that home. I gave up on fighting because I needed to do something else in my life. But I was born into Babylon. And you come to Tel Aviv, you see the whole world there. And so I lived most of my life in international migrant countries because then I went to London. There's a country called United Kingdom, and there's a country called England, and there's a country called London. And it's not the same thing. I mean, the whole world is in London, and so I did some of my education there. And then I went to Australia. Well, what is Australia? These people from 100 countries in Melbourne alone. And it is one place in the world when you can be a proud Maltese and a proud Serbian and an Australian at the same time. Come to Melbourne, and we don't have any problem with that. It's the second biggest Greek city in the world. First is Athens, then there's Melbourne, and then there's Thessaloniki, and we live happily together. It's a futuristic culture. I think, other parts of Australia too, but Melbourne is acing it, And so there's home for everyone. In Melbourne, the most tolerant city in the world, Melbourne became my city. I started in Sydney, I moved to Adelaide, and I ended up in Melbourne. I still consider myself a Melburnian because it's a model city. The whole surrounding too, but so, I was born into this international community. Then I went to South Africa. Well, you know how we call South Africa? We call it the new South Africa. We call it the world in one country. This is the motto of the tourist office department in South Africa. We've got 10 million people coming to visit every year in Cape Town alone. I'm not even talking about the safaris in the Kruger part. So we have 11 official languages in South Africa. Everyone can demand communication with the government in Swazi and Xhosa and Zulu and Shengen, you know, because you have a right. 11 official languages. And so that's what Nelson Mandela said. It's a home for everybody living here, and all the colors, and we are called Rainbow Nation. And look at the color, the flag of South Africa, it's a rainbow. So that's where I come from. And then I am not Eastern, I'm not Western. I'm sort of Eastern Central European in the Middle East, which is in the middle too. I spent 30 years in the English-speaking world, but I ended up where I belong, in Central Europe, because here East meets West. I think the extreme of the East is still in collective consciousness, and the extreme of the West is egotistic consciousness. Both of them are necessary, but in the center, something new was born, and it was born only recently, last 200 years, the culture of the individual, which is not the extreme of egotism, and is not the extreme of collectivism, but a culture in which the individual finds oneself in the context of culture, but the culture doesn't dominate the individual. The culture is created by the individual for the individual. And so I want to acknowledge Friedrich Nietzsche. He's the prophet of the higher I. And he was not subject himself to any nationality. And Goethe, who said the home of the poet is everywhere and nowhere. He refused any touch with German nationalism in rebellion against Napoleon. He said, I'm a human being, I'm not more German than I'm Chinese. That's Goethe. So this is a culture of Central Europe where the diversity of nations in Central Europe means that we can only live together peacefully if we live with tolerance to each other. Welcome to European Union. You know, it's a model country. And so I'm proud to be a part of that. I think it's a great achievement. And so still, it doesn't mean it's all the same. But I took myself around the world, and I did this work in 5 continents. I needed to test that the new culture of empathy is for everybody, because it's a new level of consciousness empathy. I call it EMQ. It's not IQ, it's not MQ, it's not SQ, it's EMQ. And it's a new kind of consciousness because it happens between people. Because I cannot say to you, oh, Mick, I'm so empathetic. I understand you so well. One day you will understand that I'm an empath. And you don't understand that I'm empathetic now because you're not evolved enough. But you will realize one day how empathetic I am. Now, this is a stupid sentence.
Well, I was actually going to ask you something about that, because you said earlier that, you know, on a personal level, you struggle with empathy, like lots of us do. And I'm just interested in that, like on a personal level, you know, because probably a lot of people here listening now are counselors or therapists as well. But how do we deal with that it's a struggle for us? And there's kind of another question in the background, which was there as well, about empathy, that is it possible to have too much empathy too much of the time? You know, because there is this concept of the empath who is maybe so given over to everybody else's world that they lose themselves. So there's that as well. But I'm interested in as well the struggle with empathy, and is it this, you know, that we are wounded healers, all of us, or what do you think? Where and how is that for you?
I don't believe in the idea of empath because you cannot do empathy alone. I mean, the test of empathy and of every step in its development is, do I understand somebody else from inside in such a way that they feel understood? So the previous statement that I made, that I'm so empathetic, I understand you, and you don't understand how empathetic I am, is a stupid statement, because if I'm empathetic, every baby will know I'm empathetic. And I lived a lot with dogs and cats, and they know when you're empathetic and when you're not. And every child, and a foreigner and a stranger and anybody you bump into, you can create a moment of empathy, and they know it is. They know it is. So I cannot be empathetic to you if you don't feel I'm empathetic to you. It doesn't exist. It's not a thing to be individual empath. I could be more and more prepared to switch it on. I'm not empathetic in the same way all the time. I can switch it on more or less. And no, you cannot be too empathetic. So, okay, it's a new term, all right? So we're still defining what it means. I'm not trying to control it. I'm defining my terms. To be empathetic for me means, okay, an act of empathy means an act of discovering another step of understanding you from inside on the basis of understanding me from the inside. If I try to understand other people and to be good to them and to do what they need me to do and to serve them well, and I forget about myself, that's not empathy at all. Maybe it can qualify to be sympathy, and definitely maybe even compassion, maybe even some definition of love, but not empathy. Empathy includes the observer. It's a consciousness in which the observed and the observer move together. If I do empathy in a methodical way, I never get exhausted. I never lose my boundaries. I never take too much of you into me, so I don't know how to fall asleep. Doesn't matter how much you suffer, I take it fully in, but I'm fully present. The more I am present, I am open to you. And if I keep a balance between being deeper in touch with me while I'm becoming deeper in touch with you, I cannot have too much empathy, because the more I'm empathetic with you, the way I do it methodically, the more I have to be in touch with me. Now, I really like you, and I hope for long-term colleagueship and friendship with you, Mick. And I say we have 10 years to be together. I'm 70, you know, I'm not here forever. And every time we meet, I hope to discover something new of you. And I can only do this if I discover something new of me. So methodical empathy is what I can define. I cannot define empathy for anybody else because the word has been around for more than 70 years. So people are free to define it their own way. And there are different definitions. But my definition is to understand the other from their own point of view more and more on the basis of understanding me from inside of me more and more. If I do it in this way, it is balanced every step of the way. And I cannot fall into you and be too empathetic. To say to be too empathetic for me is like to say to be too intelligent, or to be too loving, or to be too musical, or to be too sensitive to the reality of animals. It's just being more human if we do it in a balanced way. And when people get fatigued and losing boundaries because of what they call empathy, I would challenge it's not empathy at all. And also, to take Buddha point of view for a moment, I don't think the Buddha lost himself in developing compassion. I think he found himself in this. I don't think the Buddha would teach people lose themselves in others. And yet, in the profession of counseling and psychotherapy, there's something called compassion fatigue. I think it's a misnomer as well. Real compassion does not fatigue you, because you become more yourself by opening your heart more to others if you do it in a methodical way. And Buddhism is teaching how to do it methodical. And I don't think you can fully understand the Christ without understanding the Buddha. I think first can the Buddha, and then can the Christ. And the Christ is still coming. And it was the preparation. And in some stories, as you know, Jesus Christ himself for the Buddhists as a part of the journey. So we are not developing love instead of compassion. We're developing love on the basis of compassion. And empathy is another expression of love. So no, I don't lose myself in this. I'm doing it 32 years, and I'm still looking for the next client. I don't believe I lose boundaries. I don't take my client to sleep with me. I don't think they take me to sleep with them. It's become a bit more intense with the students because we really become a part of each other's life for a while. And so we have to work on boundaries on a deeper level, but we teach boundaries. We call it methodical empathy. We don't just teach more understanding and be there for the other. We teach boundaries. And the boundaries are not boundaries of separation. They're boundaries of meeting. You see, if these two hands are two people and they come close to each other, these boundaries between these two hands, there's a skin between them. They don't just disappear into each other. Even my two hands don't disappear into each other. They touch each other. So the boundary enable touch. Healthy boundary enable intimacy. Healthy boundary is like touch. So we develop a living boundary, which is different between me and anybody else. And if I invest in my boundaries at the same time that I invest in my openness, it stays centered all the time. But that doesn't fall from the trees. And we have to do it methodically. And that's why we call our colleges School of Empathy. Here, I'm speaking from Škola Empathy in Slovakia. We are starting Škola Empathy in Prague. In England, we are calling it School of Empathy. And in China, we are calling it now School of Empathy, although they will find the Chinese equivalent. And so we teach methodical empathy. It's a schooling of empathy. Empathy is a baby, not even been there in the dictionaries before 1951. And so, of course, there's different interpretations. But the future is empathy, if there's a future.
Well, I think what you've done just now is to give a much broader definition, and also to, I think that's really healthy to compare it with this concept of an empath, which a lot of people have these days, and the idea that empathy is we can have too much of it and fall into the other. That no, it's actually if we are doing it methodically, and we know what we're doing, actually it won't take our energy, we won't lose ourselves. And I don't know, I think Louise wanted to finish this section up at around this time, so I don't know if it sounds like quite a good rounded off point. Louise, I don't know where you're at, but what do we think?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you, Mick. It sounds like a good place to stop.
I just want one more comment. In South Africa,
I think we can allow that, can we, Louise?
Maybe one more comment.
An anecdote. And in Cape Town, when Louise met me, students did this course for 4 years. And at the end, they had to present a tesa, like you defend a tesa in magistrate or master's or PhD.
Sorry, Yehuda, I didn't understand. I didn't catch what that was.
To complete our training, you had to present a tesa. You have to defend a thesis.
A thesis.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm losing my English.
Don't worry.
They call it tesa here. Thesis, yes. So one of our graduates, Christina, she presented a research on how to change children's behavior in the kindergarten by counseling their parents. That was her discovery. And when she presented it with a few adult educators in the panel, who are not my students, we invite people from outside to, our students had to present themselves in such a way everybody understand them. And so I'll never forget, there was a famous counselor sitting on the panel there in South Africa, also in connection to anthroposophy. And when Christina presented how she's doing it, she described methodical empathy. And I'm talking about 2006 or something like that, or 5. And then it was challenged. It always challenged from the panel. And so the counselor in the panel said, Christina, you say that you are putting yourself more in there and include more of you in order to do empathy with the client. But for me, counseling is putting myself aside to be available for the client. It's not me. I put myself aside to be available for the client. That was her idea of empathy. I couldn't help myself. I'm not supposed to interfere in this panel discussion, but I had to say that I just couldn't help myself. I say, doesn't matter the name. My friend, if I would put myself aside to do empathy, who will do the empathy? If I put myself aside to do counseling, who is going to do it? I need to be more here to do counseling, not less. No, I have to be there to do it. I cannot put myself aside. I have to be much more present. So present that my eye can reach out to your eye. So that's my final comment for this part, that it's different from the idea that I'm not important, I put myself aside. Don't tell nurses they have to be more empathetic than kill you, because they think they're too empathetic, but they forget themselves because nobody's teaching them empathy with oneself on the way to be a nurse, and nobody teach our teachers empathy with yourself to be empathetic. But in some counseling training, many of the humanistic kind, they do. I'm not the only one. And there's very good training for counseling in England and in Australia. That's what I know. And yeah, I'm not the only one. I belong to these associations. They are my colleagues. I'm a founding member of the Australian Society for Counseling and Psychotherapy Educators. And so, of course, we're not the only ones. We do it in a particular way. We do it methodically. It's probably the only school of empathy in Europe. But there will be many more in the future. So I'm saying the few million of us moving in the front of empathy. I'm one of them, but there's no billions, just a few millions, if we are lucky. But that's the future. And it does in different ways, different philosophies, different methodologies. They're all my brothers and sisters, and they're all my colleagues. And we started recently, as you know, to have an annual empathy conference here online, and you made a beautiful contribution to the last one, because we want to meet all the people who are working in this way, not just us, and put also our students and graduates in a context of a broader fraternity of people who are working on this cutting edge.
I think that was the great thing that I enjoyed a lot about the conference, and thank you for the invitation, was that it wasn't just people from within a small circle who know you and know about your work and are doing the similar work, but actually people from much further afield. And it really did feel like a reaching out across the world. So it was really special to be a part of that. So thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And so, Louise, are we moving now into the next section?
Yeah, so we're going to move back to the group. So I'm going to unpin you both so that you're just as small as everyone else. And then we can open up the field for any questions.
I could ask another question, really, just on a personal level.
Cool.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, do we think everybody here is already familiar with psychophonetics, or are there people in the group here? Maybe put your hand up if you're here and you have never heard about it before, or haven't experienced it even, maybe. But I can't. Okay, yeah, a couple of people there. So maybe for those people, it might be worth just saying, like, what does a session look like? What does a psychophonetics typically? I know every therapist probably works in their own unique way, but what does a typical archetypal psychophonetic session look like? Is that okay to ask that?
Sure. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 graduates of psychophonetics on screen. So why should I answer it? I'm asking somebody else, graduate of psychophonetics, to define what it is. And Golda also nearly finished the training. And so, friends, you don't need to hear it just from me. I'm interested in how you describe it.
What about Louise?
Yeah.
Louise, you want to jump in?
Some of us have also been clients, so some of us have experienced it the other way. Okay, so I might go broad, and I'm sorry if that's too much. You can stop me. But I'm going to go broad a little bit just to get into the question. Psychophonetics, I met psychophonetics because I was specifically looking for a counseling training when I was in Cape Town. And I didn't realize when I walked into the first seminar of psychophonetics just how right it was for me. Once I'd entered and was listening to the talk, I got it quite quickly. But the reason it's so right is because it delves into the drama. So it comes out of drama. So the conversational phase is, there's two phases to the session. There's a conversational phase and then there's an action phase. The conversational phase goes deeply working through empathy. So as I'm listening to my client, I'm really listening to my own body, my own feelings, my own resistance, my own experience, my own inner experience. And this is informing my ability to hear my client. And this process allows the client to drop deeper too, through the empathic response, to come to a new understanding of the issues that they are working with. Once there is a new understanding, there is a new sense of direction of where they are wanting to go with the particular issue they are bringing. And then we can move into the somatics, the body, the imagination, the sensing, and the movement. And so this enters then into what we call the action phase, the second part of the psychophonetic session. And so here is where the transformation of the issue begins to happen in real time. And from this place, the client has a real experience of that which they are trying to transform. And with that real experience, they can go back into everyday life, touching into it. So there's like a sense of giving them homework at the end of the session, something that they can touch back into, so that they begin to bring it into their life and bring it into their habit body and shift the pattern they were trying to shift. I think that's all I can say about that.
Wonderful. Alamkara, it's a long time since I heard you presenting it. Would you like to add something to it?
Thank you, Yehuda. Thank you, Louise. I think Louise did it beautifully. Yeah, it's almost like as you were describing that journey, I was kind of like, yes, that's the shape of the journey with someone. And I think that yeah, I'm not sure what more I can add. I find that I most of the time I'll go into an action phase kind of part of things, but I also find something to add to that was I also find that the conversation part itself can also be quite transformational. That there's something quite deeply moving and powerful that happens within that particular phase of the process. And that has become more and more powerful for me the more that I've worked with psychophonetics. So yes, there is an action phase part that follows, but for me, the conversation has got deeper and deeper and deeper over the years that I've been practicing. And I think that's a lot to do with how I have been working and processing and going deeper within myself. So what you were saying earlier, Yehuda, was so beautiful in terms of, one can't really have empathy with the other. And I think that for me has become the richness of all that conversation, is really having found that way of deeply empathizing with myself, to be able to feel into the other through my own kind of lens of my being, has become a really powerful, rich experience. For me, I find every session completely transformational of myself. So yeah, I don't know how more I can say about the actual process of it, but certainly the experience of practicing it has, over the last 14 years, been an incredible journey. And I never get bored of listening to you talk about it, Yehuda, because it's always evolving, as we all are through the practice of it. But yeah, I suppose the intuition that comes through when one is in this sense of presence can be really magical. I've had some magical experiences with clients, and I love it to bits. I'm loving it more and more, actually. And so I don't know. That's not answering the question directly, but
you're answering the question perfectly. And I just wonder if Tom King has read from his perspective, one of the most experienced psychoanalysis practitioner in England.
Hello. I just want to talk about my own journey to psychophonetics as well. So before I came to psychophonetics, I was struggling with addiction. I was going to 12-step recovery and I had lots of therapy. And then when I come to psychophonetics, I went there after being clean from drug and alcohol for 5 years and then having lots of therapy and going to 12-step. But I was lost in myself. I was lost. And then I came to you, Yehuda, in Stroud for a year to sort out my own issues, as I say. And it's like, I got into Buddhism and meditation. And then I came to meet you with Steiner, Rudolf Steiner. So it's been like a continuous journey doing psychophonetics. Like, how would I say, the commitment to take personal responsibility, that's what I feel psychophonetics has given me. And also condition 1 of the 7 conditions, working with the condition 1, each client to take personal responsibility, to be their own leader without, like relying on someone else to tell them what to do. So that's what it gave me, and hopefully it gives to them too. Yeah, and it's always, you never know what you're going to get. A session is like Louise and Anam Cara. It's like a transformation, and it's a real. I can go into a session and feel really uplifted at the end of it as well, feeling really like enlivened, working with people with the soul and the spirit. And it's a continuous journey. I really enjoy doing the work. It sort of gave me a purpose as well, a purpose to wake up in the morning and to want to work with methodical empathy and help people, and also continue my own journey as well. So I'm very grateful to be part of this journey. Amen. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to have you as a colleague.
Thank you.
May I add something to this? I'm Maggie.
And Maggie.
I don't know whether I'm coming on, but I was trained as a Gestalt psychotherapist, which is of course very phenomenological, which is really very Steiner orientated in its way. And then I gradually met with what's called, in the particular ways he works, the dialogic, which is Rich Heisner is one of the people who trains people into it. And this is so similar. This just being there, using one's own emotions, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, what the reaction is from looking or listening to someone else, that is so empowering, and also means, like you say, Tom, it's refreshing actually. I don't do it anymore. I've retired, but when I was doing it, I never came out of a session tired. I always came out of a session refreshed. And I think that's not dissimilar to what you're talking about, Yehuda.
Of course, it's connected. I learned a lot from Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt, and from other existential and humanistic and transpersonal psychologists in my journey. And I see myself as the student of this generation of 20th century humanistic, basically, psychologists, and also psychodrama, and also process-oriented and all of that. The reason I felt we have something to add to this mix and not to replace it and not to pretend to be better in any way, but I believe it belongs there. And in Australia, I was in my own country for the last time. Then I moved into countries which I couldn't say I could say I'm Australian. I couldn't say I'm South African completely. Louise can say that. And so there I could see the integration. And it was a great event in the 90s in Australia because everybody was discovering it at the same time. And I was a part of this. And it was wonderful. So why I felt I have something to add to this is because I came from theater, not from psychodrama, but from actual drama, initiatory drama. And in theater, in drama, and I spent 10 years in experimental theater in London and Sydney and Adelaide. And then I discovered that what we do in theater is too important to leave it for actors and to 5% of the population who come to live theater. I realized we are holding a treasure for humanity in theater. So out of theater, I extracted few processes which enable people to wake up to the drama of their life. We extracted primarily body awareness and movement and gesture and spontaneous visualization and the sounds of human speech. And that's what gave psychophonetics its name, psychophonetics, because this was the vision of Steiner, that the sounds of human speech are cosmic. He related the vowels to the planetary system and the consonants to the constellation, and he showed how the human constitution on 4 levels is resonation unconscious of the sounds of human speech. Namely, we did not invent human speech invented us. In the beginning was the word. In the beginning, in the Jewish tradition, God spoke the world into being. So it is in the Aborigines tradition. In the sounds of speech, I discovered the whole world. I discovered that the whole human constitution could be mapped up with consonants and vowels and the combinations. And I worked in theater for 10 years with sounds. We would build characters with minimum of 2 consonants and 2 vowels, and you've got a skeleton of the whole character. So I became a sound person, sounds of speech, not any sounds. And then I realized it's therapeutic, healing, and transformational power of these sounds. And, you know, for us, when you say, it's Venus, and ooh, is Saturn, and is Sagittarius, and is Scorpion. And this connect the whole human constitution to something much broader. And this gave me this extra tool for theater. And then I realized I want to take it to people. So I gave it this name because of that. And I felt this should be there. And then it evolved in Australia further. I realized that I'm not just doing the action phase, dramatizing people's life. There is a process of deepening empathy, is what Anam Kara tried to say, which became more and more systematic. And in the year 2000 in Melbourne, we established methodical empathy on top of the action phase. I say we because it happened between me and the students. They said, we want you to teach us what you do in the conversation. Because I used to bring teachers from counseling, from the humanistic counseling, and say, we can do this in university. You tell us what you do. And I didn't know what I was doing. And so they say, go and find out. So I had full load of clients at the time in the Melbourne Therapy Center. And for a few weeks, I observed what I was doing. And then I realized I know what I was doing. And I made it into a method. And so we developed a science of empathy, if you wish, methodical empathy, which I did not meet in our journeys in the other streams. And I'm not saying there's no other methods, but we developed the methodical empathy, which means what Louise tried to explain. We developed the conversation into 2 major parts. Part 1, perceptive empathy. Part 2, transformative empathy. In a methodical empathy, we move through 4 levels of consciousness methodically. Reflective empathy, imaginative empathy, inspirative empathy, and intuitive empathy. And we give specific training for each one of them. Now, I wasn't as clear about it when I was teaching in England. This really developed in Central Europe with this. I do it since the year 2000, but it became more and more clear. And then with the reflective empathy, we have to move from passive projective reflection into attentive reflection. In the imagination, we have to move from thinking in concept to thinking in pictures, but not our pictures, but the client's picture. In inspiration empathy, we have to go deeper and use our deep emotionality as a resonance chamber for the emotionality of the client. And in intuitive empathy, we have to go straight into the eye and join the client from the inside, close to the impulse of incarnation, like what are you doing here in this life? We don't ask it, but we listen to it. Then people are ready to move on into transformative empathy. And in transformative empathy, we challenge them to look at what they don't want to look at. But we don't challenge them, we provoke them to challenge themselves. Namely, I want to go deeper into myself. When we feel the client is ready for that, and they feel that we are already friends, then we show them opportunities to take more responsibility, as Tom described it. For him, this was the main point. We help people to see what I am not yet taking responsibility, where I am still objective about myself instead of being personal about myself. And I know a lot of what I'm saying is the language of Gestalt, is the language of humanistic psychology. I'm not trying not to include it. I include it. They're my people. Fritz Perls and Carl Rogers are my heroes, you know? So I'm building on that. It's just another dimension because I came a bit later. And so in the transformative empathy, we address the intrinsic will of the I to enter deeper. And we give it opportunity to go deeper, pointing to the contradictions and the different voices and the gaps in values and all the chaos which they want to take responsibility for. And that mobilizes the will to change. And then we move it into a challenge that enables them to express a wish. In the middle of our process, which what Louise tried to describe, that conversation move into action, in between, we have a ritual called the wish. And every session, the client has to state a wish, an executive wish, every session. And the wish become our command. We have to understand it. We have to evaluate it. We have to make sure that it's a wish which is in the interest of everybody. We don't support wishes which will go against somebody else. So there's basic ethics to it. But most of the wishes come very mature after this process. And the wish is new and it is fresh. And then we take an example from life and dramatize it and see all the characters inside of it. So it is this combination. Basically, we are doing drama just without an audience. So this combination of the 5 different levels of empathy methodically, together with the drama dimension of it, together with the sounds, I felt I have something unique enough to put it on the table to say, here's another one. Not better, not worse, not more, not less, just in the round table of human-based counseling and psychotherapy, here's another one. And we want it in dialogue with others, not, we don't teach our students in isolation. They have to go and study other things too and put it in context. But we are opening it wide. We have no secrets. That's what we do. What do you do? And we exchange. And another step in this exchange started to happen by this international empathy conference that now happens every year in Slovakia, online too, in early October. So yes, there is Gestalt in it. Yes, there is psychodrama in it. Yes, there is even depth psychology and element of psychoanalysis in it. And yes, there's a systemic approach in it. And yes, there's family therapy in it. All of it is in it. I'm a student of all of that. But I felt with a background of Rudolf Steiner's psychosophy, there is an approach to the psyche that is not on the table yet, because he gave a method for developing higher dimension of consciousness, moving from reflecting to imaginative, to inspirative, to intuitive, to will empathy. And I translate this insight of psychosophy, that's his word for it, into a practical path. And I felt it has a place around the table. And that's all I do with it. I say, here it is, around the table. Look around.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.